Okay,
There
so
you
welcome, Alessandro. I'll restart the recording.
are. Uh-huh. Okay.
To record, Dawn? Oh, yes, you have. Good.
Can you see?
It's
Now,
in
if you
presenter view.
yeah,
You need the other screen, I
Okay.
think.
swap, yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
Okay. Good. So, well, thank you for being here. And this is mostly for Steve and Almog, and Almog is not here, as I can see. So,
Okay.
well, it's mostly for Steve.
I'll
And
send, keep going. I'll send him a Discord.
okay, good. Because I want to show all of you our last research, which is on, actually, I want to read the title, an empirical inquiry into disproportionate lexical sophistication utilized in conspiracy and pseudoscience text in the absence of necessity. So self-explanatory. So let's start. When you read books about writing, they mostly tell to write short sentences, to use concrete words, and try to avoid jargon. Mostly make your ideas clear and for everyone. But people still use a lot of jargon, maybe to show off. So jargon is associated with a set of negative consequences, like essays that have a disproportion of jargon. A lot of jargon tend to be evaluated negatively. Papers, scientific papers with jargon tend to be less cited. And jargon also impairs people's ability to process scientific information and make them more resistant to persuasion. But people still use jargon, right? Why? So jargon sounds true, more satisfying, is more sciencey, and sounds more important. There was this paper series of papers by Westberg, and they created a psychological explanation for psychological phenomena, and they put some neuroscience, irrelevant neuroscience terms. Those texts were rated more satisfying, especially by people who didn't have a background in psychology. Jargon,
Alessandro, before
yes.
I forget, can I interrupt? Sorry.
Ah,
That,
yeah.
that Weisberg et al. Apparently hasn't replicated.
Ah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Somebody told me that I was referring to that recently, and somebody told me, no, 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 you can't mention that. It hasn't been replicated.
Oh,
So
that's
make a note to check that and make sure you get to the bottom of this because you don't want to be called out by the audience saying, ha ha, that didn't replicate.
yeah, very cool. Thank you. Actually, everyone, please stop me, interrupt me because, maybe I forgot something, so just interrupt me. So back to jargon. It's cryptic and ambiguous. So there is this paper by Boudry and Buchans who explain the jargon used by Jacques Lacan, a psychoanalyst who's famous for writing in cryptic language. And so cryptic language um, cannot be rebutted. You cannot say anything against a text that you don't understand, right? So, and this is the use of jargon as well. And jargon also conveys social status. So mostly people with low status, or for example, young students compared to older researchers tend to use jargon as a way to rise their status. How about conspiracy theories? So there's not much out there. Conspiracy theories are mostly focused on a rhetoric of scientific inquiry. So, they just ask questions, and they emulate formal features of academic discourse. So they rely on jargon and pseudo demonstration. So they try to imitate scientific language. We did a study where we analyzed linguistic text from a creativity perspective. So we analyzed nominal compounds. Nominal compounds are agglomeration of words, nouns, like chocolate cake, climate change, and we analyzed their creativity. So how they were generated and how they were used. So basically, we found that the generation was creative, so compounds were original and divergent, but they were used more rigidly. So we interpret this as if conspiracy writers pick sophisticated words from specialistic sources like science text, and once they found it, they repeat them out of context. So in order to sound sciencey. Besides this, there is no evidence on, there is not much empirical work on understanding the sophistication used in conspiracy text. And here is our work. So Steve and I want to empirically test whether conspiracy theories use jargon basically without a reason, or we can say they use disproportionately sophisticated words. Okay, so now we go into the methods. So we need some corpora, right? Because we need to assess whether we need to analyze conspiracy text and compare with non-conspiracy text. So we can have text either labeled as conspiratorial, pseudoscience, and either on binary labels, so yes or no, or on a continuous scale, continuous rating. So to do this, we rely on two English corpora, which are Loco and Donald. Loco is a corpus of 100,000 documents, 23,000 are conspiracy. And Donald is a corpus of 2 million documents, and 230,000 are conspiracy. We want to extend this research into other languages, so we use IRMA, a corpus of Italian misinformation, and German, a corpus of German misinformation. So the problem with IRMA and JARMA is that they are misinformation, and there is no binary classification between reliable and unreliable text, or conspiracy and non-conspiracy. And the same for Loco and Donald. There is no individual document label whether they are conspiracy or not on a continuous scale. So we decided to ask ChatGPT for many documents whether they are conspiratorial and their degree of conspiratoriality. So we took all documents of Loco and asked ChatGPT, I want you to provide an integer score from 0, no conspiratorial, to 10, strong conspiratorial language. And we did the same with a subset of 140,000 documents from Donald. Then we also wanted to know about whether documents refer to pseudoscience. So we wanted to create a dictionary, so a set of words that can can point to a document whether it is pseudoscience or not. So we built this dictionary here, and there are some quiet pseudoscience words like acupuncture, homeopathy, crystallomancy, but it's not so perfect. There are other words that are not specifically pseudoscience, like zone energy. It's not perfect. But nevertheless, it's quite consistent. So 40% of conspiracy documents are pseudoscience, and the rate of pseudoscience is higher in conspiracy.
Sorry, Alessandro, I was interested to see NLP in there. You had that highlighted but didn't mention it.
Yeah. So NLP, I mean, it could be either natural language processing or how is it called?
Neurolinguistic programming is what it will mean.
Exactly. Yes.
I certainly would file that under pseudoscience, I think.
Yes. Yes. It's definitely pseudoscience. Actually, this is it should be the pseudoscience one, but if you search for NLP, you get a lot of you could get science paper with natural language processing. Okay, so then we moved into rating individual documents on the conspiratorial level for Irma and German in Italian and German. So again, we asked ChatGPT. Why we did not check for German, we checked for Irma and asked 3 native speakers to rate the conspiratorial theorizing for 180 documents, and there was quite a good correlation. So it seems that ChatGPT is capable of identifying conspiracy documents also in Italian. So summing up the material, we have 4 corpora here, Loco, Donald, Irma, and Germa, on which we can run analysis either in binary, so checking differences between conspiracy and non-conspiracy, or testing the correlation between conspiracy and this measure that I will explain soon. But we also...
Alessandro,
Yes.
since we used NewsGuard while building Irma, I think we should have that information because NewsGuard also classifies domains based on whether they share conspiracy theories or not. Like, it's not the article though, but it's the domain.
Yes, I also did that, but was not precise because within a domain, you have many different level of conspiratorial document.
Okay.
Yeah, I already did that and was actually accurate. For Irma, was a correlation of 0.60, minus 0.60, 68, something like that. But I prefer to have individual documents.
Okay.
And then also pseudoscience. So this is binary, either yes or no. For Donald, we did this for the whole corpus and also for the 140,000 documents.
Alessandro, a question: to what extent do the two overlap? So in other words, your 23,000 CTs in Loco, how many of those are also in the 27,000 pseudoscience articles?
I don't know the numbers, but here are the proportion. So conspiracy...
Yeah, but they could be different articles for all we know, right? They could be completely different.
Yeah. I didn't check for that.
Well, it's not important now, but you might as well at some point say, hey, how many of those are both conspiratorial and pseudoscience?
Yeah. So maybe it's good if I start keeping some notes. Well, we will I remember that. Okay.
Right. Alessandro, I can send you the questions later by email.
Super, thank you. Okay, everything is clear? Good. So then we need norms of sophistication. Okay, so we need to know which words are sophisticated and which are non-sophisticated. So in general, there are sophistication norms that are called age of acquisition, or better, age of acquisition is also considered a metric of sophistication. So, for example, a word like mama, dada, pizza tend to be low sophisticated words that are learned early in infancy. Okay, a word like orbitofrontal cortex or gonorrhea, for example, are learned later in life. Okay, so those are considered sophisticated. So in English, we have words of sophistication, norms of sophistication for 30,000 words, which is good. But in Italian and German, we have very limited sets. For Italian, for example, we have only 2,000. So since we wanted to extend this research to other languages and not only English, we decided to ask ChatGPT whether words are sophisticated or not. So we did this for English, German, and Italian. And then we check the correlation with the existing norms. And I will say again, they are quite okay. Okay, now we have sophistication norms. And we need to create our measures. So we need to identify the documents that are disproportionately, that contains they contain words that are disproportionately sophisticated. And to this goal, we can use the Gini coefficient. So just to give you an example, we are not interested in high sophistication or low sophistication. So we don't measure the average of sophistication, but we check the distribution. So I call it bullshit, but it's not bullshit. So basically we want to identify this kind of documents where a small set of highly sophisticated words are included, embedded in a low sophistication context, okay? So just to give you a brief explanation of what is the Gini coefficient, is a measure of inequality, where zero is perfect equality and 1 is maximal inequality. So here, if you look at this example, if 100 people earns $100 each, you have perfect equality because everyone earns the same. If one person earns everything and all the other people nothing, you have maximal inequality, a Gini coefficient of 1. So you see that the Gini coefficient goes to actually measure the area below the this thing that I don't know how it's called. You say the maximal area equals to 1 and no area equals to 0. Okay. So now we have text, we have a measure of word sophistication, we have a way to measure the disproportion of sophistication. Now I show you what we did in our documents. So we take each document, we pass the text and lemmatize the word. So we reduce the word to the non-inflected version. We remove stop words from the text, and then we map sophistication norms. And then we compute the Gini on the sophistication values. So to give you an example, we have this sentence, the red cat is on the orbitofrontal met. Doesn't make any sense, but it's syntactically valid. So what we do, we parse the text, you see that we extract the lemma, and then what we do is getting the sophistication norms for each lemma. You see that red is 12, cat is 10, and orbitofrontal is 85. And we got a coefficient of 61. You see here the difference. If all words were cat, 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 you got a Gini coefficient of 0. If you put orbitofrontal, which is a highly sophisticated word, you get a coefficient of 0.61. So hope this is clear. Okay. So we got the measure. Now we need to validate those measures. And then we can finally run our analysis on the corpora. So for validation, we asked ChatGPT to produce an essay on topics that are listed below. And this is the control condition. Then we asked ChatGPT to create an experimental condition in which we asked ChatGPT to add sophisticated words unrelated to the context. Okay, so here are the text we did. This is not important right now, but maybe we can go later. And this is the prompt we use for ChatGPT. So I want you to modify or add a few words that are highly complex and or sophisticated and are semantically unrelated to the sentence in which they are embedded. So we tested the differences between experimental and control condition. Next, we did topics, and yes, it seems to work here. So we are ready now to test it on our corpora. Before that, we wanted to test the correlation between sophistication and Gini on sophistication and conspiracy. So those are correlation coefficient, and you see that there are negative correlations between the Gini coefficient and sophistication, which makes sense. The more highly sophisticated is a text, the less inequality there is. Makes sense, right? But it's also true that conspiracy theories tend to be more sophisticated. Those are the correlation between sophistication and conspiracy on the individual documents. Okay.
Sorry, so I need to. Okay. So the more sophisticated the text is, the higher it is in conspiratorial thought.
Yes.
A tiny bit.
Yes, those are the correlations between conspiratorial level and sophistication.
Okay, and this is sophistication with the entire text.
Yes.
Right, and so the correlation with the Gini coefficient is the absolute sophistication correlating with the Gini coefficient of sophistication.
Exactly, yes.
So the higher the sophistication, the lower the inequality of sophistication.
Yes, exactly.
But isn't that sort of inevitable? Is this
Yes, exactly.
This is not a surprising result, is it?
Well, it was for me, to be honest. But then if you run sophistication, so if you have 5 values like 1, 5, 1, 1, 1, and you run Gini, you get a Gini of 0.60. But if you sum 100, then you have very low Gini because the relative difference is pretty much nothing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So it makes sense. And Gini also correlates positively with the number of words. I don't know why this is the case. But it correlates with number of
Well,
words.
it has to, because the larger you sample, the more likely it is you have extreme observations in there. And you need extreme observations for a higher Gini. So that's an inevitable consequence of just basic statistics, I think.
Okay, that's good.
That's how I would look at it.
Okay. And I didn't think about that, but about the
It's
sophistication.
like if you build a house next to a river, if you live in it for 10 years, you might not get a flood. But if you live in the same house for 100 years, you're bound to be flooded at least once because the sample size is greater. And that means you have a higher probability of encountering an extreme observation. And the same is true with a bag of words. The more words you have, the more likely it is that some of them are extreme on whatever measure you're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, super.
That means the inequality is probably greater. I think that, to me, is inevitable.
Okay, that's fantastic then. I'm reassured. So in any case, since there are those correlations, we wanted to also, we ran the models testing differences in Gini between subcorpora and the linear correlation with conspiracies, but we also had sophistication and word count in the analysis, just to correct for. So we have 2 sets of analysis. Okay. So, and now I show you the results. There you are. So the columns are the 4 corpora and sample size is here. So Donald 2 million, Donald 144,000 documents. A and B refers to A is just the difference, the row difference, and B is the difference adding the covariates. So adding sophistication and word count in the regression. Okay. In the first row, we test differences between conspiracy and non-conspiracy. Positive coefficients means that conspiracy documents have higher Gini coefficient, so present higher inequality, okay? In the second row, we have conspiracy continuous, which is the linear regression between the Gini, the continuous Gini, and the continuous rating of conspiracy. And below, in the third row, we have pseudoscience, which is binary. And so we test the differences between pseudoscience and non-pseudoscience on the Gini coefficient. And again, positive coefficient means that the Gini is higher in pseudoscience. So Everything looks,
Alessandro, can I just, for clarification, each row there is a different model, is that correct?
yes, yes.
You also had a pseudoscience continuous score, didn't you, out of
No.
No, you didn't.
So I tried to use the dictionary, this one, as a dictionary,
Yes.
but it really doesn't work at all. It has a correlation of 0 with conspiracy. I don't know why. I need to check that. So this is just a rough indication of whether a document could be pseudoscience.
Okay, but the binary classification you are confident is working.
Yes, yes. I'm not confident.
Why are you confident? How did you verify the pseudoscience? How do you know the pseudoscience classification is actually correct?
I didn't check that.
Okay.
So as I said earlier, it could be a science text with NLP as a natural language processing. It could be the case.
Right. Okay. So I think that is probably worth focusing on.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But for the conspiracy, I'm actually confident because I ran the correlation also with, as Fabio mentioned earlier, with the quality of the websites.
Okay.
So
Okay. Yeah.
that
Good.
was pretty good.
Okay, good. But basically, this is very interesting and illuminating because it does show what you expected, which is that conspiratorial text is higher in inequality of sophistication, and that is a marker.
Yes.
And the same is true for pseudoscience.
Yes. And I would say it's quite robust because it works on local, with or without 2 million documents. It replicates on 144,000 documents. It replicates in Italian. It doesn't replicate on German, but the coefficient is positive. And probably we can discuss about German, why it doesn't work.
Only 1,300 documents, so it's a smaller sample, and I mean, yeah, big deal. Given the pattern, I'm not too concerned about that one number that isn't significant.
Yeah, exactly. Well, last slide. I tried to do other.
Alessandro, one other thing. You go back to that. Have you actually plotted this to see that the relationship is linear? Because one thing that you might, there might be some nonlinearity in there, that the function relating conspiracy to Gini is accelerated or convex, concave, whatever, and in which case the models may be underestimating the effect, or they might overestimate it.
Yeah.
So have you looked at that?
I did a couple of plots, but didn't really look at in this specific thing. So I can actually plot all the stuff, or better test the linear or quadratic.
Yeah, and look at the residuals too, and see if there's some weird stuff. Just do some diagnostics on the models, the sort of standard stuff, to make sure you're not overlooking some flaw.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I was mostly concerned about those kind of correlation, but as you reassured me, so I'm quite happy with that.
I think so. They don't disturb me, and this pattern is pretty nice.
Yes. Last thing, I also checked by using different subset of stop words. So in the analysis I show you, I removed the most used 200 words in English. So the top, how do you say, the most frequent 200 words in English.
Right.
But I also run the model without removing stop words or removing the 500 and 1,000 most used stop words. I also work on the vocabulary. So not only on all words, but also using only the vocabulary, which is the unique words. Okay. And I also use entropy, but later I discovered that entropy is really unrelated to this concept. So entropy is mostly related to how often unique values occur, I would say. Does it make sense to you?
Not entirely, but I would think stick to the genie unless you have strong reason not to.
Exactly. So here you can see that I tested entropy on all words, Gini on all words, entropy on vocabulary, Gini on vocabulary. So basically this is the other table, but with all the other coefficients. And there is another thing which was cool until it doesn't replicate on pseudoscience, which is unrelatedness. So basically I wanted to see if the most sophisticated words in each text are semantically connected to their context. So, for example, if the cat is on the orbitofrontal mat, so the cat is on the mat makes sense, right? Semantically speaking. Orbitofrontal cortex is completely unrelated. Okay. In this case, I tested whether the top, I don't know, the most 5 or 10 sophisticated words in a text are semantically related to the sentence in which they are embedded. Okay. So, and what I found is that in Loco, this unrelatedness is higher for conspiracy, which was a fantastic idea. So not only we show they use disproportionate, highly sophisticated words, but also those words are unrelated to the text. This is a fantastic idea. But then it doesn't work for Donald, the binary classification using 144,000 documents, and it doesn't work for pseudoscience. So I left the idea because maybe there's something wrong in here. Do you have any idea on this?
No, I don't. I mean, so how do you assess unrelatedness again? Is that a pairwise correlation between all words in text? Sort of.
No, I use the global vector. So I extract the vector of
Yes.
a highly sophisticated word,
Yes.
and I check the cosine similarity with the matrix of the vectors of the sentence in which the word is embedded.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I see. So you have a one vector for what? The target word. How do you pick that though? That's the most sophisticated word in a sentence?
Yeah, in a document, the 5 most sophisticated words in a document,
Yes.
I check where they are in which sentence,
Yes.
and I extract that sentence and I check whether the word is semantically fit or not.
Right. And the vector you compare it with is a representation of that sentence without the most sophisticated word.
Yes, I remove the target.
Yeah. And so, okay. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, the problem I can see that it is just a very local context, right?
Mhm.
Rather than the document overall. Maybe, I don't know, maybe, yeah, I don't know. I think if it's easy to do, I might do it by relating it not just to the sentence it's in, but the entire document.
I can try that. It's super expensive in terms of time and computational resources because it's a loop within a loop, for 30 or, but I can try that. Why not?
Yeah, if it's worth it. I mean, I'm not sure. It's sort of a different issue, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
so maybe drop it, just focus on the genie. I mean, from my point of view, the really interesting thing here is to have a statistic that is theoretically motivated, and that you find is indeed predicted by what you're interested in, right? I think that is really cool. And I would stick to that in a sense. There's no reason to add other stuff because the message to me is pretty clear. Now, one question I have is it worth flipping it around and running a discriminant analysis whereby I give you the Gini coefficient and you tell me this text is conspiratorial or not, or you tell me this text is likely to be pseudoscience versus it isn't. So kind of like using the Gini as a classifier.
Okay. I can try. You mean logistic regression, stuff like that?
Sort of, yes, effectively, yes. Can I predict membership of a class, so the binary case? Can I predict whether something is conspiratorial or not, given no knowledge other than, let's say, the Gini and maybe the overall level of sophistication or whatever, the other covariates, maybe, and just see how good is this? What's my classification ability? Because, I mean, this is all very impressive, but what I would love to know is if I know nothing about text other than its Gini, is that enough for me to make a guess about whether or not it's conspiratorial? My suspicion is that it's a pretty good hint, but it would be nice to quantify that.
Okay. That's interesting stuff to try. And yeah, unrelated, for me, it was super cool because if you can show that not only they use highly sophisticated words, but those words are really used, loosely, and they don't know what their meaning is, and they put it there. Yeah, that was a cool finding.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. It's really good.
So that's it. Any other question or suggestion?
Thanks, Alessandro. That was great. Should applaud you for that. So very good. Yeah, over to everybody else. Questions, comments.
I think Constance has one.
Hello, great presentation, Alessandro.
Thank you.
I have two questions, one comment and one question, basically. So I agree with the interpretation that Steve gave about the increasing size, which increases the likelihood of having extreme observations. But I am a little bit skeptical because what you're interested in here is the average, right? Like the average inequality within the sample. No?
Well, not really, because we accept the Gini coefficient from each document.
So, and you said that it's the size of the words in the document that yeah. So you get one inequality measure for each document, right?
Yes.
So I'm thinking that the more the words are, yes, you have a higher likelihood of having extreme observations, but on the other hand, each observation should be less influential to the inequality. So I'm not saying that that what Steve said doesn't. I agree with Steve's interpretation. I'm just pointing to this aspect that this might also play a role. And then my question would be, have you investigated false positives, like cases where you could have false positives where they say, okay, you have a high Gini coefficient, and we evaluate this text as conspiratorial or anti-scientific, and you end up having something that's completely different. It's completely not unscientific.
Yeah, I did some exploration, but really having a look at the text like that, but not systematically. And actually, this is a valid point because I should be more systematic on this kind of inspection. So thank you. And I write a note now. So check text. Thank you.
Brandon's got a question as well.
Yeah, really interesting talk. Thank you. It's not a question actually so much. It's just a very minor comment about the way that you positioned using jargon at the beginning of the talk. I wonder if you should perhaps be clearer about the fact that when you say that jargon infers status, that you're not agreeing with that statement, that you should perhaps say that a certain category of person believes that to be the case. Because actually the irony is that those people who genuinely do have that status and scientific knowledge would, in the main, prefer to speak plainly.
I didn't get your point, sorry. But yeah, maybe you know the paper, right? That one. This one. So basically,
Yeah, so the Brown et al. Paper, so it says that it conveys social status, but it only does to people who have a similar lack of understanding of the jargon that's being used.
oh, I see. Yes,
So,
yes.
so people who actually legitimately use that jargon in their everyday life would not be fooled by its use in an inappropriate context. So I think it's perhaps important to say, rather than that it conveys social status, that some people believe that it conveys social status. It's a subtle point, but I think it's important not to sort of appear to agree with that statement, if you see what I'm saying.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
And yeah, I had a similar comment, which is, I don't know if you know this paper that it's a while back, but it's about how people perceive the use of unnecessarily complex language, and this is if they don't understand as well. Basically, they actually think the writer is less intelligent. I can send you that. It's got my all-time favorite title. I'll look it up and put it in the chat.
Yes, thank you.
Gordon has a question, I think.
Yeah, hi. That was really great. Thank you. I'd just be interested in your thoughts in how it kind of relates to the underlying cognitive psychology of what's going on in people who are sort of high in conspiratorial ideation and so on. I mean, is this use of language a kind of strategy that people are consciously or semi-consciously employing in order to be as persuasive as possible? Is it reflective of some underlying cognitive processes, or, how do these things relate?
I don't really know the motivations behind. We can just, talk like in a pub and say, yeah, they do to look cool, right? But we don't have empirical evidence for that. So we don't really know if they do for that. Is there anybody here who wants to add something? I mean, do you think is there evidence they do on?
I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't have an answer. I mean, the idea, well, certainly pseudoscientists try to claim the mantle of science. I mean, that's sort of, all the cranks never get up in the morning saying, oh, I'm going to be a crank today. No, they get up in the morning saying, oh, I'm going to put science on its righteous path because I'm the only one who knows science. The scientists don't. They're all, working for the world government. And so if you have that intent, how can you be a crank while sounding scientific? Well, the best you could do is to borrow these words that you maybe don't understand and sprinkle them in your incoherent text. So I think, there is a plausible path to that. And I mean, you could even try and test that experimentally by getting random people like your usual prolifics or MTurkers to write stuff under different instructions. Will they produce pseudo scientific high genie text if you ask them to pretend to be, a crank who's selling some shyster who's selling a therapy for, cancer or something. What would you say to make it convincing? And then you could argue, well, whenever you tell people to be convincing in selling bullshit, that is when they resort to this, right? If that's what they do. So that would be potentially testable, that avenue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's not really related to conspiracy or pseudoscience, but mostly to someone who wants to convince, right? So it's mostly related to persuasion, probably more than conspiracy.
Well, I don't know. Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that's the sort of question. So a sort of complementary approach to the one that Steve was suggesting could be to look at the language that these individuals use when they aren't trying to either talk about conspiracy-related topics, or when they aren't actually talking in a way trying to persuade other people. Because I think it could be pretty interesting to see whether you still get these elevated Gini coefficients in those situations. Assuming that's not the case, I think that would be quite strong evidence that it is a strategic kind of feature of their attempts at persuasion. Yeah.
Yeah, this reminds me, there's one way in which you can do this even now, Alessandro. There are all these corpora out there on deception, and where people and machine language models actually do a very good job at identifying deception. And the way you manipulate deception is by asking people to pretend that they went to a hotel that they really liked when in fact it was awful. That sort of thing. They've done it with sort of TripAdvisor reviews where people had to be deceptive in what they said for an incentive. And they've done it with, there was a talk show somewhere in the US or Japan or some random place where the game of this TV show or whatever was to deceive people. I mean, that was the stated game, everybody was trying to deceive everybody else, and somehow this was a game show. And there are transcripts of that, and people have analyzed that to get deceptive text that was meant to be persuasive to in the sense of persuading people, I'm actually telling the truth, but hey, I'm lying, that sort of thing. And I wonder if that's worth, the deception detection corpora, whether that is something you could use. And then I guess, Gordon, would it be correct to assume that you'd get if it's a persuasive technique, then you should also get a higher Gini for those deceptive texts that are not conspiratorial?
Yeah, it would have to be a sort of a science relevant thing in order for some of these strategies to really be an option. I mean, if I'm trying to persuade you that it's raining outside here in Warwick when it isn't, then probably the availability of these sort of pseudo sophistication strategies isn't available to the same extent, right?
Right.
So I don't think all of deception would necessarily have this feature, even if that's the intended aim. But that also provokes me to a second thought, which is there's a difference between trying to enhance your own status and perhaps apparent kind of expertise as a persuader, and on the other hand, trying to enhance the persuasiveness of the actual message. Okay. So I can, if I'm trying to persuade you, I can either try and come up with persuasive arguments, or I can try and convince you that I'm an authority in the area, right? And they're separate things. And I'm just wondering, I'd be interested in your thoughts on which of those two aspects is served by these kind of strategies, assuming that they are strategies rather than reflective of some general sort of cognitive characteristics.
Well, I'm not really into persuasion, it was just an idea put out in there. I think they can overlap in a certain way, right? I mean, if you want to be persuasive, like drink lemon and other stuff, you can cite science. I mean, cite. You can use sciencey words and appeal to authority, like say, yeah, there's this guy on the internet that says so, and he has a PhD. Yeah, and stuff like that. So I don't really have a thought about that.
Yeah, it's a good thought, but it's hard to tease apart, I think, because you'd have to look at each text and try to classify it, whether it's a sort of reputational argument or whether it's an argument based just on itself, right? I mean, you often get that the cranks will refer to world famous Nobel Prize winning scientists who think climate change is a hoax. That's sort of a very standard type of argumentation. Yeah, okay, interesting thought, worth keeping in mind, I think.
I thought about it sort of came at it at a different angle, which is thinking about when you might want to make yourself look smart, or so it's more about the authority, well, maybe not really caring about whether you're persuading the person. And that's, say, if you've been tasked to write an essay, as we probably all have throughout our student days, you want to get a good mark. You don't really want to persuade whoever's marking it or whatever the content is. And is that possibly a source that you could analyze? Of course, you like getting a sense of which one's trying to do that versus which one actually understands the content is obviously a bit more difficult.
Yeah, if you ask people to produce stuff that was either intended to be persuasive or intended to enhance the status of the speaker, it would be pretty interesting, yeah, to see how those were the same and different. I think that's a great idea, actually.
I think getting a good mark is a sort of persuasion. I mean, if you tend to use cryptic jargon in an essay, you think that the person grading your essay think you are smart, right? And so you think you get a better grade, which could be persuasion, right? I mean, I let you think I'm better than what I am.
Yeah, but that's the point that Gordon was making. Like, you're trying to persuade of your own smartness as opposed to selling the content that's in the essay. So, for example, if I'm trying to write an essay about, I don't know, AI, I'm not trying to sell you AI, I'm trying to show you how much I know about AI.
I see now. Okay. No thought on that.
Cool experiment though. Like, yeah, I either try and make this person buy this or show this person how much you know about this.
Well, there's a way actually, because social media like Reddit, there are some studies on Reddit, and those people try to convince that 9/11 was an inside job and all these conspiracy theories. So in that case, this could be kind of persuasion, right? If those people write to non-conspiracy people, which doesn't make any sense. Okay, yeah, forget it.
But it comes back down to the sort of the reason behind the speech act, so to speak. Whether that's to find belonging or to get people to agree with you or there's all sorts of reasons that we might need to dig into there. So you kind of have to isolate the context first.
Okay, I'm going to have to go to my next meeting, unfortunately, my staff meeting. I heard back